art and culture, terms which are very relevant for UPSC aspirants. You must be always wondering what is art, what is culture, and that is why we brought an expert with us. UPSC Essentials welcome all of you to our new brand show with Devdutt Pattanaik on art and culture of the UPSC Essentials. Let us first talk about what's going to be the structure of this program. So, Devdutt Pattanaik is going to explain us in his own style and expertise about various terms, ideas, and questions which are relevant for UPSC with respect to art and culture. But here is something special about it. Devdutt is going to answer questions which are asked by UPSC aspirants. Yes, so you can ask questions to Devdutt speaking about various themes of your syllabus, art and culture of UPSC syllabus. So first of all, welcome Devdutt to your show, to our show of the UPSC Essentials with art and culture with Devdutt Pattanaik. So today's theme, Devdutt, as you all know, and as all our aspirants are already informed about, is about art, culture, and we are linking culture with civilization. So there is a question which is posted by one of our students, one of the aspirants, and she sent a video question. So let us begin with this question.
Hello, my name is Rashmita. My question is, can you discuss culture is what we are and civilization is what we have?
So this is basically a past UPSC question, and which is quite relevant for a UPSC aspirant to ask a question from the past year UPSC paper. And since Devdutt has gone through a lot of questions from past year, he would agree that, UPSC sometimes ask these a tricky question which doesn't require so much factual knowledge, but it definitely requires analysis. So the trend here is, or the style of this video series will be that I'll break up this question into smaller parts so that Devdutt will help us to reach this wider question by discussing also the smaller tidbits here and there. So as Rashmita asked that, can you discuss culture is what we are and civilization is what we have? Let's break this down to the first important question, which is a very relevant question, which is what is culture and its important elements?
So culture is the human way of life. So human way of life. That's the simple answer. Plants and animals don't have culture. Humans have culture. Now, when we look from an archaeological point of view, humans have evolved over millions of years. So when do we say that we stopped being apes and we became humans? We become humans when we start showing signs of technology, which means now we have started creating stone tools, using fire hearths, we have started using jewelry, we have started drawing on the cave walls. This indicates we are no longer animals. We have now started becoming humans. That means there's a human way of life emerging, and that is culture. Every human being has a culture. And that's the point which must be remembered. There is no human who does not have culture. So whether you're a tribal person or living in a village or living in a city, whether you're living in different parts of the world, doesn't matter. As long as you're human, you've made the journey out of the animal kingdom. You're no longer an ape. You've become a human. You've started using technology. You have entered the world of culture. That's the first point to remember. Now, why do humans create culture? Is the question. And that leads us to the elements of culture. So I always remember the basic way to remember is ऐसे रोटी कपड़ा और मकान. आदमी को रोटी कपड़ा और मकान चाहिए. So culture में भी there would be something to do with roti kapda and makan. So it will be something to do with food. There'll be something to do with house, something to do with security, and there will be clothes, jewelry. That is the beginning of, that is economics, right? I want food, I want clothing, I want shelter. तो वो होगा कल्चर में एलिमेंट्स। इसको बनाने के लिए, इन ऑर्डर टू गेट दिस थिंग्स, इन ऑर्डर टू गेट रोटी, इन ऑर्डर टू गेट कपड़ा, इन ऑर्डर टू गेट मकान, आई नीड टूल्स एंड टेक्नोलॉजी. सो देयर विल बी टूल्स एंड टेक्नोलॉजी एज पार्ट ऑफ कल्चर. Once you have tools and technology, once you have these economic needs, you will also have certain intellectual ideas, because we are humans. Humans के पास विचार होते हैं, कल्पना होती है, दुनिया के बारे में हम सोचते हैं कि what is the purpose of life. तो फिर हम कहानी बनाते हैं, songs बनाते हैं, stories बनाते हैं, which we express in stories, songs, paintings, art. इसमें हम व्यक्त करते हैं. तो ये सब कल्चर का हिस्सा बन जाता है. I mean, I remember it like this. I mean, because I study mythology, I'll always say 3 देवियां हैं भारत में: लक्ष्मी, दुर्गा, सरस्वती. लक्ष्मी is for economics, रोटी कपड़ा मकान, सैलरी. दुर्गा is politics. Politics is power, शक्ति से, यानी कि टूल्स, टेक्नोलॉजीज, लॉज, ये पॉलिटिक्स में आ गया. और फिर सरस्वती, तो उसमें आर्ट्स आ गया, म्यूजिक आ गया, डांस, थिएटर, आर्ट, आर्किटेक्चर, सब आ गया वहां पे. सो इफ आई रिमेंबर लक्ष्मी, दुर्गा, सरस्वती, आई नेवर फॉरगेट कल्चर. हम कल्चर से, संस्कृति में हम इन तीनों का निर्माण करते हैं.
It's a very lucid way to explain in a very clear and probably that is what I think UPSC aspirants need, कि आप simple तरीके से और गागर में सागर भर दीजिए, isn't it? So वो that style of you, Devdutt, and I think all the aspirants who are watching us should also understand कि when you're writing an answer, that should be conveyed, that simplicity, that clarity should be explained properly, conveyed to the examiner. And since you have talked about this buzzword culture, now let's move on to civilization. So suppose if I ask you that what is civilization, you've explained what is culture. Now let's understand what is civilization and its important elements.
You know, sometimes whenever I want to understand something, I try to translate it. So when I say culture, people will say Sanskriti. So jungle, nature is Prakriti, culture is Sanskriti. हो गया संस्कृति. फिर what is civilization? फिर हिंदी वर्ड आ जाता है शायद सभ्यता. You know, सभ्यता. But now comes civilization is a slightly problematic thing because, you know, 100 साल पहले the word civilization was used very differently and today we use it very differently. 100 साल पहले ब्रिटिश का राज था, colonial powers were there and they were trying to say that they were civilized. You know, Europeans said they were civilized. So they said a civilization is a culture which has a complex society where there is hierarchy. मतलब एक पदानुक्रम होता है. There is a upper class, lower class, elite, aristocrat, and then there are common people. ऐसे एक hierarchy होता है society में. And then they said ये बड़ा बड़ा cities होना चाहिए, monuments होने चाहिए. They should have palaces, tombs. So they used these words because they themselves were colonizers. They also were dominating. And they said, oh, we are civilized because हमारे पास बड़े बड़े building हैं, इमारतें हैं, we have tombs, and we have a class-based society. उच्च वर्ण, नीचा वर्ण, this kind of thing. And that is the definition of civilization that you'll find in most textbooks. However, if you read the latest archaeological works and you read the big scholars today, they will say कि देखो civilization ये बहुत ही भयानक definition है civilization का, because what it tries to suggest is people who dominate, जो empires बनाते हैं, who control colonizers, imperialists, ये लोग civilized हैं. और जो कॉलोनाइज नहीं करते हैं, आक्रमण नहीं करते हैं किसी दूसरे का, वो लोग सिविलाइज नहीं है. और जो बड़े बड़े इमारतें नहीं बनाते, वो सभ्यता उनमें नहीं है. दैट इज नॉट ट्रू. So the definition that now archaeologists are using increasingly, archaeologists mostly, is does a culture trade or not? Trading. जब ट्रेडिंग होता है, यानी कि मेरे पास कुछ सामान है, आपके पास कुछ सामान है, when I start trading things with you, then a culture becomes a civilization. A culture takes care of its own people. A civilization works with neighbors, with other people. So now let us take the example of Harappa. Harappa civilization, Indus Valley civilization की हम बात करते हैं, उसको civilization हम क्यों बोलते हैं? Because it was part of the Bronze Age trading network. Bronze, Kansa, which is a mixture of copper and tin. Now, in this civilization, there was trade happening between India and Iran. India was giving some things to India. से क्या जाता था? Most probably cotton, most probably sesame, तिल का तेल. So ये यहाँ से जाता था, and we would send lapis lazuli and jewelry would go out of India, और वहां से कुछ आता था. So what would come from there? Perhaps bitumen, जो tar के लिए use होता है. Maybe that was coming. तो लेन देन हो रहा था. Trading was happening. And that means it is a civilization. So the definition of the word civilization for me, this is a more easy definition, is a trade-based. But as I said, you cannot forget the old definition of a complex society. So the old definition is simple, complex. The new definition is non-trading and trading. So जो tribal groups होते हैं, for example, there are the tribal groups in Andaman Islands, Jharua tribals, I think. So वहाँ पे they are not trading. They don't like to trade. They don't like strangers coming to their islands. That means they are still a culture, but they have not reached civilized. They don't want to trade. उनको exchange नहीं करना है. So we should remember this point. How does civilization come into being? We start talking to our neighbors, exchanging ideas, exchanging goods, exchanging resources. Then lots of things start to move from one place to the other. That is the beginning of civilization.
It's interesting, Devdutt, how you have also explained the old way of thinking about civilization and the current way of how archaeologists now define it. And therefore, for aspirants or the people who are going to write exams, you should take care of both the definitions and explain it in terms of the examples. Probably that will convey the point better, isn't it? Now, if you may, for our general understanding, just very briefly, if you can just differentiate between what is culture and what is civilization, though you have defined it. But अगर हमें मोटा-मोटी छोटा-मोटी भी points में अगर करना होगा, so what should we write?
Culture is the human way of living where the focus is internal. It is taking care of its internal needs. It's taking care of its economic needs, its political needs, its intellectual and aesthetic needs. Civilization is one which is larger in scale and is looking at other people's needs also. And therefore, when you talk about other people, you start moving into complex societies. So upper class, lower class, you start talking about laborers, bureaucrats, merchants, farmers, warriors, priests. So there are different groups of people. And you're also talking about other communities, neighbors, friends, enemies with whom you are exchanging goods, you're exchanging ideas. And therefore, trade routes comes into the picture. So that is the fundamental difference. You don't talk about trade routes. You don't talk about a class system or a multiple groups of people working together, each one specializing in different things. These things do not come when you're talking about culture. Well, if I want to be very complicated, then I'll say all civilizations are culture, but all cultures are not civilizations.
Well, I can see this as a question. I can see this as a UPSC advanced question, It's a good, you've given a clue to paper setters and examiners, this kind of question. I think students should think about it. It's like all minerals and ores. Minerals are ores,
Yes.
but ores are not minerals and vice versa kind of thing. Interesting. But pardon me if I'm wrong, but there's a curious Manas in me, and I'm sure a lot of aspirants would ask you that there is also these words like uncultured and uncivilized. So if you have defined what is culture and civilization, can you also tell me or tell us what is uncultured, what is uncivilized, how relevant these terms are?
So these words are used as terms of insult. So nobody uses this nicely, that, when you say he's a cultured person and he's not cultured, which means a non-cultured person would be like a savage. He does not follow human rules. He's not functioning like a human being. He doesn't use utensils. He doesn't use tools. So that becomes a uncultured man. He is not behaving like human. He's behaving like a savage or an animal. Savage is a human who behaves like an animal. That's the way. And these are words, as I said, of insult, which were used by people to insult those who they don't like. Then comes civilized. He's not civilized. It means he doesn't know how to deal with people who are different from him. He doesn't know how to deal with people from different cultures. He doesn't know how to deal with people from different communities, different class. He doesn't know how to negotiate with difference. And this is important. As I said, when you talk of civilization, scale increases, diversity increases. You're talking about different types of groups of people and engagement between these different types of groups of people. So it's no longer a tribal community where you know everyone and everyone dresses the same way and everybody follows the same rules. Now you're dealing with multiple groups of people, each one following different vocations, believing in different things, following different customs and practices. How do you deal with differences? If you can't deal, I can't deal, he's an uncivilized man. He doesn't know how to deal with different people.
That's true. Now, if I move beyond the basics and if I ask you that a little advanced question, that how India's ancient civilization, since we're talking about civilization, how India's ancient civilization differ from its contemporaries, like for example, you have Greece, Egypt, or Mesopotamia, etc. So in general, if you can say that, what is that unique thing in Indian civilization?
So, let's go to a little bit of, prehistory, before. So you have got, initially in India, you have stone tools being seen. Then suddenly you have got this explosion of very organized cities which were trading, which means civilization, which is the Indus Valley civilization. But that's not all that is in India, right? Then you have what is called the Vedic period. In this period, you find in the Gangetic plains, you have got these painted gray ware material, basically special kinds of pots which are different from the Harappan pots. The Harappan pots were red in color and black in color. So suddenly you have a new group of people which is using gray color pottery. Meanwhile, what's happening in South India? All this is in North India, Northeast and Northwest. South India, you suddenly have these gigantic mounds, what's called ash mounds. They were like these, maybe they were pastoral people. They had cows, goats, sheep, pigs. They would take the dung and for some reason they would put it in one place and burn it from time to time. And we find this in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh. We really don't know what they mean. In fact, nowadays, if you go to some of these places, they'll say, ye Bhasmasur ka tila hai. So Bhasmasur, because ash mound, but we don't know what they mean. So you have these things in India, which we must remember. So when we talk about ancient India, we are not just talking about Harappa. We are also talking about these things. And we are, in South India, there are hordes of copper things. India was very famous for copper. India was very famous later for iron. India was a major source of iron. We did not seem to have tin. Tin seems to be coming from Central Asia. So we needed to trade. But you find these copper hordes in many parts of India. Then, and this is all before Vedic period or parallel to the Vedic period. While Vedic period is happening in North India, in South India, you have got these copper hordes, you've got these ash mounds, you've got these megalithic societies, big megalithic rocks. And then you have, for example, in Baghor, which is central India and Madhya Pradesh, you've got one of the oldest shrines, perhaps the oldest deity of India, which is a triangular kind of rock, which is 8,000 years old. Now, all this is part of ancient India. So when we talk of culture and civilization, we should remember this diversity, right? So we must remember we're talking about megaliths, that is big stones. We're talking about microliths, small stones which are used for utensils. We are talking about ash mounds. We're talking about pottery. We are talking about copper hordes. All this is part of Indian culture, civilization, long before even this Vedic and Harappa overshadows everyone. But we must remember India is a very big country. And Indus Valley civilization is Northwest India, Gangetic Plain is Vedic area. But the rest of India, what about Deccan? What about this? And then we look at now Egypt. Now this zone is as big as Europe. Right? It's as big as Europe. Maybe, so South Asia, which is India, is a very big region. Now, when you talk of ancient Egypt, you think immediately of pyramids and tombs, right? When you talk about Mesopotamia, you talk about ziggurats. Ziggurats are these big structures, pyramidal structures, on top of which there were temples. Now, what is the fundamental difference that you notice? And we are talking about Bronze Age period. Bronze Age was a very important period in human history between 2000 BC to maybe before that, 2,500 BC to 1500 BC. For 1,000 years, trade network was happening from Afghanistan. Lapis lazuli would travel from Harappa to Mesopotamia. Now, what is the big difference that you notice or I have noticed? One is ideological. ideologically, you find, and that emerges much later in culture, is in the Indian subcontinent, the idea of rebirth is a very important idea that shapes Indian culture. Indian culture is shaped by rebirth. I'll keep coming back to this point in all our sessions. While in the Middle East, it's Egypt and Mesopotamia, the idea of one life becomes important. You have only one life. Now, Devdutt, how do you come to this conclusion? The conclusion is wherever people believe in one life, they build tombs. Tomb building is a major activity in cultures which believe you live only once. India does not have an equivalent culture of the pyramids, of the massive tombs filled with treasures that you find in Mesopotamia, which is Iraq, or in Egypt, that is the Nile Valley, in the Euphrates and Tigris. So although all of these are river valley civilization, all of them are farming civilization, Neolithic civilizations, all of them are urban civilizations, the number of tombs that you don't find an equivalent number in India. One of the possible reasons is this ideological difference which shapes India. And I think this is an important point to remember. We cremate the dead. And you have narratives. When you come to even in the Harappan zone, you find compared to the population, the number of burials are very few. We have found very few burial sites compared to the huge, massive population which lived here. And it has been a mystery. In Dholavira, for example, they have found grave sites with no bodies in them. They're just sort of representative tombs. There are no bodies there. So it's very strange for the number of population. Did they cremate the dead? Did they just throw them in rivers? Did they expose them to the elements? They didn't build tombs. I think that is an important point to remember, which makes Indian culture unique. And it shapes our thinking in very, very big ways. In the later period, it becomes more evident. Right at the early period is something which I have noticed. This absence, we have tombs, but nothing of that scale.
I think it's also interesting because, see, this is a vast question, and I will like to inform it to our viewers and aspirants that we're going to do a lot of shows with Devdutt, and in future episodes, we're going to talk about these things in detail. But when it comes as a question, and you have a limited time and word limit, this is how you can approach. You can pick up a point and explain through it. So, for example, Devdutt talked about ideology difference, and so that is a big difference between different cultures. And also, as rightly pointed out, that it is not about, when we talk about civilization, it doesn't start only with Indus civilization or Harappan culture, or it is way more than that, before that and afterwards. So these are certain points which aspirants should keep in mind. And I think speaking to Devdutt clearly tells us that what's going to be our approach. So what we've done today, and the show is still not over, but just to give a brief, that we talked about what is culture, we talked about what is civilization, then in a unique style by giving examples, Devdutt also differentiated between culture and civilization. Then we talked about the two terms, uncultured and uncivilized, and we also discussed a larger question comparing the Indian civilization with the other contemporaries. Now, here is something special which we do. Devdutt is going to leave us with a point to ponder, which will also be a catch for the next episode. So Devdutt, can you, for our viewers, for our aspirants, for students, and all the culture enthusiasts, give us a point to ponder for the next episode?
Why is history of great relevance for art and culture? So when art and culture doesn't exist in a vacuum, it always exists within a historical, and I would add geographical framework. So think about it. And that's an important point to ponder about.
Excellent. And what clicks to my mind that today we've compared and we have connected culture with civilization. In the next episode, we are going to talk about culture and art. And this is how we are going to talk about with this point to ponder. And I would like to thank Rashmita for a wonderful question, which helped us to break down the question and get such valuable insights from Devdutt. In the next episode, we'll have a new aspirant, a new student asking a question to Devdutt, and Devdutt is going to break it down for us into simpler points and will again give us a point to ponder. So that's all for now. We will be back with Devdutt, connecting culture with art in our next episode. And don't forget to subscribe the Indian Express YouTube channel and UPSC Essentials. Also, we'll have an article followed by this video, which will have key takeaways from Devdutt's today's talk. And that's all from UPSC Essentials of the Indian Express. And as I say before going, think smart, work hard, conquer your goals.